Welcome to The Roll Forward, a podcast for the next wave of finance leaders, especially those looking to transform their roles by making smarter, faster, and more profitable business decisions using the power of technology and a forward-looking approach to finance. Listen in to learn how to get out of the back office trenches and become a more strategic partner within your organization.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roll Forward podcast. My name is Joe Michalowski, and this episode is brought to you by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. And today, my guest is Chris Ortega, CEO of Fresh FP&A, fractional CFO, advisory services business, transforming and scaling finance organizations. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Joe, what's up, man? Nice to be a part. Nice to be here.
Yeah, awesome to have you. We got to catch up, before we decided to do this. It was a great conversation. You just bring a lot of energy, man, and I appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to chat. Before we get started, we have a lot to talk about, but can you just give the quick background about yourself, finance, accounting experience, the path to where you are now, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I've been in accounting. This will be year 18 in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership. Time is fun when you have fun, but started off my career in public accounting at Ernst & Young. Tremendous opportunity. Got to work with a lot of Fortune 1000 companies here in Indianapolis, which was a great experience. But then I realized, you know what? I don't want to be the number spell checker. So I want to get actually into the business and do the work. So I started my first entrepreneur technology company, which was called Cha Search. Was the accounting manager there. And, looking at my career, Joe, for the first 6 or 7 years of my career, I was in heavy accounting. Then I would say the next 6, 7 years, 8 years of my career, that's when I got into finance. That's when I got into FP&A at high growth SaaS businesses. So building, shaping, growing, and scaling the finance organization is really, really cool there. And then the last half of my years where I got into that financial leadership at SaaS businesses. So most recently, I was part of a marketing platform company called Emarsis. And built that America's operations all the way up from 30 employees all the way up to about 150 employees in 3 or 4 years time, and then actually led the acquisition through SAP. And then I got through the acquisition, been to the mountaintop, built and shaped and scaled a lot of different finance organizations that I had the chance to work with. And then I found myself at this fork in the road, Joe. I said, look, do I continue to go down the CFO route? But then I was like, man, I know what it takes to build, shape, transform, and scale a finance organization. I know the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. And I felt there needed to be a fresh perspective on finance. So a little under a year ago, I started Fresh FP&A, which is a fractional CFO and advisory services that help businesses transform and scale their finance organization in different high growth businesses. So this week in February, it'll be a year anniversary of me doing this full time. But I've also been doing Fresh FP&A. It's kind of like a side hustle for the last 5 or 6 years. So that's what got me here.
Yeah, man. Well, congrats on the 1-year anniversary. This episode, I'm hoping, should be live right around when that 1 year hits. So that's awesome. Even I was really excited when we chatted the first time, just because your background aligns so well with what our audience is, that SaaS background. And like you said, you've been to the mountaintop. So you've been everywhere from boots on the ground, heavy accounting, all the way up through getting that exit with the SaaS company, kind of scaling it there. So I think you bring, a fantastic perspective for our audience. And I'm really excited to dive into the Fresh FP&A perspective that you are talking about. And we're going to spend, most of our time talking and getting into the weeds of that. So before we sort of get into specifics, do you want to just give the 30,000 foot overview of what Fresh FP&A means?
Yeah. So when I was at that fork in the road that I mentioned earlier, right? And I was thinking of a word, and I remember sitting here and I was like, man, there needs to be a new perspective. There needs to be and I was like, the word fresh just popped in my head. And I was like, that's definitely going to be it.
Yeah.
Bringing the swagger to it. So I was like, it's definitely fresh with a new perspective. But I also felt there needs to be a new perspective on FP&A, right? When you look at traditionally of FP&A, the first thing a lot of business partners think about is financial planning and analysis, right? For me, I was like, that's not technology. Technologies like Mosaic, other technologies can do they can do the planning and analysis a lot better than what I want me and my team to do. So FP&A means to us is financial partnership and advising. That's the new level of FP&A. So when I was thinking about my business, I was like, I want to bring a new perspective to the financial partnership and advisory that we provide to the business. The reason why that's important, Joe, is because when you think about the business, when you look at pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and the post-pandemic, the level of collaboration, communication, connection, and community that the business wants from the office of the CFO, they don't want more calculations, more critical spreadsheet formulas, right? They want to be collaborators. They want us to communicate inside the business. We need to bring clarity. So for me, that was the catalyst and what started everything around Fresh FP&A.
I love it. First of all, the brand is great. The sweatshirt you're wearing right now, if people are just listening to the audio, missing out on the freshest CFO sweatshirt, which I'm jealous, man. I love the brand. And so you said you just sat down, you were like, it has to be fresh. And I think, from a going out on your own, the entrepreneur side of it, great choice. But even just the whole like concept of it aligns so well with what, we talk about, strategic finance, and like it's sort of our take on exactly what you said, because when our founders sat down and they were like, okay, like we have an idea for this, it's sort of, I remember they showed me like a pyramid, and it was like, okay, this pyramid kind of represents all the tasks finance and accounting like takes care of. And it's like 80% of your time is on those like bottom 3 layers. It's like transactions. It's just like getting the reports out the door. And then at like the tip top, it was like, all right, 20% of your time is like actually collaborating and, being strategic, driving growth. And everything I'm hearing for you is like, yeah, we got to focus on that like top part. Like we have to sort of flip that pyramid. So I really love it. And I'm excited to dig into it. But, the first thing that I had down on my list that I wanted to talk about is like, if this was so easy, like everybody would just do it. Like it's really easy for us to say, yeah, take that fresh FP&A approach, take that strategic finance approach. But it's not easy. Like it's hard to get there. And so I'm curious, like what have you seen as like the roadblocks to actually embracing your thoughts around fresh FP&A?
Yeah, this is something we do at Fresh FP&A. So on our advisory side, we do financial transformation, and it's
Yep.
really the catalyst is 3 key pillars that people aren't ready to take that next step, right? The people,
Yep.
the processes, and the partnership. When we look at the 6 pillars of financial transformation, those are the foundation level pillars. You need the right people doing the right work, providing the right value to the business. That's the people, the process, and partnership. And when you look
Yep.
at organizations that say, "Hey, we want to be that financial partner and advisor. We want to be that level up. We want to level up our skill set," right? But you got to start at those fundamental levels, right? A lot of times, and I'm not knocking, a lot of finance organizations, and I've done this myself, so I'm speaking from experience, right? You think that you're gonna go get that new technology and it's gonna solve all of your problems. You think like, "Hey, we're gonna bring in this awesome tool," but you don't have the right people. They're still doing this manual work, and you don't have the right partnership value that you're bringing into the organization. So for me, for organizations that want to get on that roadmap to being that financial partner and advisor, to be that valued advisor in the business, less about the scorekeeper, less into the data aggregation and data mining, focus on those 3 pillars, right? And to even go a step deeper, right? Focus on those 3 pillars the same way you will focus on a quarterly forecast, a quarterly budget, or an annual plan, right? The same diligence that you go through, right? What we advise our clients on around the people, the process, and the partnership, you got to set the vision, identify the strategies, set the tactics, set the milestones, set the metrics, right? So you can
Yep.
take that same framework around the people. Okay, what's going to be our vision of the finance organization? What are some strategies that we want to have? How are we going to tactically execute on those? What are those milestones, 6, 8, 12, 18, 24 months that we want to look at? And then what are the metrics that we're going to measure as a team for success that we can communicate across the business? So for me, that is the framework for a lot of organizations that don't know where to start and they think technology is going to solve it, or start with the people, start with building that solid foundational house of that finance organization. Get the right people in the right seat, have them doing the high value work, and bring that high level of value partnership to the organization. That's the recipe for success.
Yeah, that it sounds great. I had a question here. It was like, what's kind of like the crux of the problem? And to your point, you think people are gonna say, yeah, it's just like one platform away, and like we would like to think that technology is supportive, but yeah, without the right mindset, without the right people in the seat to get it done, like it's all going to fall flat. So I would completely agree. Like we've talked about those same three pillars and like how to improve them in the past, and I love that you sort of sit down and try to think through that. And so I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into, your actual engagement, like with a client. So when you sit down, you go and you do or you put the framework in place that you just mentioned. I want to assume that the people can't really change off the bat. So like, you're not going to go in and you're going to say, hey, you have to like revamp your entire finance organization, especially if it's like a smaller, like SaaS business. They might have like 2-3 finance people. You're not going to say, hey, I know you guys just hired me, but let's get 3 new finance people in here because we just don't have the right skills. It's just probably not a great business model for you. And so it sounds to me like a process is really like, how do you get that existing finance team to put the right processes in place? And so where do you start? Like what are some of the first processes that have to change to get this vision to work? Like where do you begin with these companies?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we look at those foundation level pillars, it's really, the people's where we start with first sometimes, right? Like I'm not saying it's like every time because you may be dealing with a client that has, as you mentioned, they have that typical VP of finance, finance manager,
Yep.
accounting person or controller, and like a staff FP&A or staff accountant, right? Like interchangeable. That's the typical framework that you see. But on the people side, I'll talk through like quick start guide on all those. On the people side, one thing that we
Absolutely.
do is exactly right. We don't go in and say, hey, you need to get rid of your entire finance team. That is not a scalable solution, right? But one thing we go and identify is we say, okay, what are the core competencies that you're looking for in
Mm.
your finance team of the future, right? The whole purpose of that is you're doing a little forward forecasting. Like, what are those? Like, we need great storytellers. We need people that are great communicators. We need people that are be able to turn complexity into clear, concise conclusions to the business. We need people that have a curiosity of learning the business, right? These are all core competencies that you want to identify and say, hey, everything was right. We had the funding. We had everything fell into place. Here's the core competencies that we want to look for in the future. A lot of times we do consulting and advising with the clients and help them understand what those 4 to 5 core competencies are. Then the second thing that we do is like, okay, what are the baselines that you have now, right? Like, what is, if you look at your 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, 2 people, whatever the amount of number of people that you have right now, what are the core competencies that team has, right? A lot of times you see, hey, they're great at problem solving. They're great at, this ERP tool. You start to identify where are we at, which is that baseline assessment. And then where do we want to get to for our competency team? Now you know those ranges. Here's where we are. Here's where we want to get to. Now comes into that same discipline that we take to a cash flow forecast, the same discipline we take to a budgeting forecast. We know where we're at. We know where we want to get to. How do we develop the strategies, the tactics, the metric, and the milestones to get us from A to B? And then how do we break that down into maybe monthly chunks, quarterly chunks, semi-annual chunks? Now you get the rigor into it. So that's what we do on the people side. Same thing on the process side as well, too, right? Typically, where I land and expand and where we see a lot of clients needing help is definitely around the automation, around the accounting, the automation around the data aggregation. They're taking data from all these disparate systems that nobody's updating, and it's the whole garbage in, garbage out mentality. So typically, same thing you do right there, right? You look at it and say, what are the processes we have now? What are the bottlenecks? One thing that we do with our clients is we do a full mapping of all of their financial processes. So we look at contracting, we look at order to pay, we look at the month end close. Here's a baseline of every process right now that you have that touches the finance organization. Then we say, what is the ideal state that we want to get to? The reason why that kind of baseline and where do we want to go, now that gives people like an honest assessment of here's where we're at, right? Here's exactly where we're at in our
Exactly.
people. Here's where we're at in our processes. Here's where we're at in our partnership. It gives that reality check because one thing I always see too, Joe, is you got those VPs and those CFOs out there to be like, yeah, Chris, what are you talking about? We're valued advisors. Like, what are you talking about? Business brings us to the conversation. And then I talk to their CEO and I'm saying, hey, what is the value that your finance organization brings to you? And the first thing he says is, oh man, they make sure to get the numbers to us on time. I'm sorry, like that's not gonna blow people's mind. That's like to be expected, right? If
Yeah.
your value proposition that you're bringing to an organization is that you get the numbers on time, I'm sorry, technology can do that a million times faster than you want people to do, right? So for me, that's typically where we start on those engagements. Understand the baseline, know where you're at, know where you want to go, and develop the strategy, tactics, metrics, and milestones of how you want to get there.
I think I love it. I think it's exactly what we hear as well. It's like, yeah, everyone talks about wanting a strategic seat at the table. Like you want to be in the room. Somebody, I don't know if you've seen Hamilton, but the room where it happened, like I talked to somebody one time who kept referencing that, and I was like, that man has seen Hamilton a few times, and I appreciated that. So I think that all makes sense, and I really love getting the CEO's perspective. Like as the advisor, like you get to go in and you get to see what the reality is. And it's a good reality check for anyone in the finance team. And so when you're talking about going from, point A, from that baseline to where you want to get to, I wanted to home in on the process part of this, because there's got to be some like easy wins versus like the really hard changes to make. So I want to start with what's hard, because why not? What have you found to be the hardest processes to modernize and to get from baseline to where companies want to get to? And like, what tips do you have for kind of working through that?
Yeah, in both working professionally and the client in the advisory that we do with clients, one of the key processes that everybody struggle with that you need, if there's one takeaway, you have to make sure that that month end close is not running outside of like 15 days, right? Like that close process and everything that goes along with that is like the starting point of being a strategic finance person. Let me give you an example. When I was working at a SaaS company, right? Our month end close, Joe, we were getting done with the month end close typically like around the 18th, 19th of the month, right? So you had you had more than a 2 week period where there's like nothing going on in the business. There's no like the business is waiting for finance to get done with the month end close, right? Then when we get done with it, we will have our one like couple days, business days of reporting to the business and to our board, to our founders and everybody, right? What we did last month and what that compared to. We're already walking into the next month, right?
Yeah.
So typically one of the key processes if you get that month end close down to like 2 to 3 days, right? Think about the time, energy, effort, and resources that you can dedicate thinking strategically about the business, right? That's always one that we tackle when you want to be that strategic partner. The partnership is not just FP&A as well, too, right? Like you have to bring and a lot of organizations, and I see this sometimes where you have accounting and you have FP&A like kind of siloed, right? Like the accountants are in the corner and the FP&A team are in the corner, and they only talk about once the month end close is done, and that's when the baton is passed off, and FP&A takes it from there. You don't want to do that. You want to have those teams understanding the bigger picture, right? You don't want accountants, but you also don't want accountants in the FP&A piece of it trying to fully understand everything FP&A does. You need to make sure that like it's not a baton being passed off; it's a running together. So that's typically one process that we see that really, really limits that FP&A team for being that strategic advisor. The second one is the processes around that, the normally things that they do around their tactical operations, right? Like the AR, the AP, a lot of that transactional level work. You've got so many organizations that dedicate so much resources to that technology. Bring in technology to help automate a lot of those different things. And I tell you, one thing I'm really excited about the overall macro space of the finance organization, you have so many great solutions that can help automate AP, that can automate AR, that can automate fixed assets, that can automate a lot of these areas in accounting, right? And the reason why I'm talking about accounting so much is because that's if you do not have a solid foundation of accounting, it doesn't matter the horsepower, the platforms, the talent that you have in FP&A, they're never going to be successful. They're always going to run into roadblocks. So typically that's where we start with understanding a lot of those tactical processes and which ones are creating bottlenecks to the FP&A and the finance organization, right? That's always and that comes back from my career, right? When I was leading and building finance organizations, I always wanted to make sure that Because the last thing you want to get into is a conversation. You're sitting there with that board member, that CRO, that CEO, and now you're spending the first hour debating if the numbers are right. You don't need to do that. So those are just some core processes. You got to start and you got to build that connection with the accounting team. You got to help them see the bigger picture. You've got to get some wins in there.
There's probably a small contingent of accounting listeners who are just like, yeah, Chris, like we are the background, we're the foundation here. So I'm sure they all appreciate that very much. And it's everything that I've heard from other guests as well. It's not just strategic finance in the way of like the FP&A side. It's strategic finance, the entire umbrella organization
Yes.
that brings in accounting. And if you're not working together, like it's going to be that garbage in, garbage out mentality that you mentioned before. So I love all that. And I think it makes sense to start with those processes because if they're broken, nothing else works. Like it doesn't matter if you have this rock solid budgeting process that's, I don't know, a month late because your numbers aren't right or you're still working through the accounting. So I think that makes sense. I'm curious if, are there some easy wins? Like if somebody listening right now, they're like, okay, Chris, like I do need to get those processes figured out. What are some like quick wins, small things they could tackle like right now instead of like, boiling the oceans? Like I got to fix my entire month end close process. Where do you start?
Yeah, I think the first one to start is probably one of the most important metrics that every CFO needs to be tracking against, right? That's cash burn and cash runway. So if there's like one process that you're like, Chris, we need to get laser tight on it, go get laser tight in your cash, in your treasury management process, right? Anything that hits that bank account, you want to have as much accuracy, as much insight, as much clarity. And think about it, like that's going to be AR, that's going to be AP, that's going to be a lot of different elements. So if there's one process for you to really make an impact and look at it at a macro level of intelligence that's like really impactful to a business, cash burn and cash runway. Like for me, like anytime like I was talking with the CFO, a fractional CFO last week, and he was really into this cash flow modeling with his client. And he was like, hey, Chris, what are some things that I should be looking at? Like I'm so traditionally used to looking at the statement of cash flows. Like, and I'm like, that's not the places. That's where the accountants start. Like, you need to like
Yeah.
dive into the actual hard numbers of that cash change. Like, you had $10 and now you have $8. What drove that change? You need to know everything around that. So, for one, I would definitely advise to start on that cash flow process. Anything around touching cash, most important one. I think the second one that you can really have an impact on that kind of goes into that cash piece of it that has an impact, the AR process. That is a pain
Yep.
for a lot of different businesses, right? That's a pain because when you think about a SaaS business, right? Like the billing aspect of it, whether you're on a subscription base, maybe you're on a usage base of it, there's so many different nuances that go into that billing cycle that may delay you getting cash in. Maybe that's something that you identify in that first process. You're like, hey, if we got better in our billing, we can increase getting our invoices out to our customers faster, which can have a better cash conversion. We get more cash in the door, right? So anything that is helping you drive and optimize cash a lot better. There's also on the SaaS subscription side. So when you're looking at some of your spend, getting to that AP element to say, hey, like, how can we get better in our vendor contracts? Those are gold mine opportunities, right? And the reason why I call them gold mine opportunities because you can see the bottom line impact on that. You can see cash coming in faster. You can see floating cash a lot faster. You can see your cash burn decreasing because you're bringing in more cash. You can see your runway being stretched out, right? That to me is like if you're looking for a win to have that you can have across the business, no doubt about it. Treasury management and cash flow optimization and really get laser specific on cash
Mm.
burn and cash runway, huge opportunity.
This is great because I showed you the question before, so this isn't that surprising. But one thing I wanted to do because I feel like sometimes like even when we talk about strategic finance, it can get very abstract. You're like, oh, it's this new like a new P and a new A in FP&A, and it's. I love the conversation. It makes a lot of sense, but I want to try to make it as like practical, actionable as possible. I think you've been doing that the whole time, so thank you for that. But I wanted to talk about since we're at that time of year. It's January as we record this. Some like 2023 trends. And the first one that I had listed was all about cash management because that's what we've seen is that big trend is, we're in this market downturn. Everyone needs to get better at managing their cash, optimizing cash runway, cash burn. And I want to hear, and you just gave me a lot of it, so thank you. But I'd love to go a little bit further on like, give me the fresh FP&A perspective on tackling new cash management challenges, optimizing those cash spend, even if it's like, you mentioned digging into AR, like how do you actually do that? What are some practical steps and maybe some wins you've seen in the past?
Yeah, so when you look at the traditional way of cash management, and honestly, Joe, my heart goes out. I think the tally's up to like 51,000 in tech people that have been laid off to
Oh,
this point so far in January, right? In the tech
terrible,
market.
man.
So first and foremost, man, my heart, everything goes out. I've been there for those people listening to this. If you're going through that right now, just understand it's just a moment in time and you're gonna bounce back. It's just a minor setback for a major setup. So first off, my everything goes out to those people affected by these layoffs that we're seeing, right? But the thing about it is like that is that traditional mindset of managing cash, right? You look at it, CFOs are like, and a lot of it, you see it, it's these exercises, these scenario plans, it's these Excel models that they're using and saying, yep, this is how we need to go make a 10% reduction, right? Some of those fresh ways, and this is where it's like, this is where I never understood it from leading finance organization. And like I've had to go through layoffs, I've had to do that, but it was our last option, right, Joe? It wasn't the first thing that I thought about. It wasn't the first thing that went through my mind was like, "Hey, we need to have a positive impact on our cash. We need to decrease our cash burn and increase our cash runway," right? It
Yep.
wasn't my first idea of like, "Hey, let's go just get rid of 25% of our workforce," right? That to me is that traditional mindset. Some ways that you can get instant wins around that, 3 areas that I'll tell people to focus on. The first one that can have a big impact, right? Look at the technology that is throughout your enterprise, right? Not just in the finance organization, right? Look at the technology that's in sales, look at the technology that's in operations, look at all the different technology pieces that your organization is using, right? And if you're that like high growth, like has business, probably like a series A, you probably don't have a procurement group, right? That was always one gap that we never had in smaller organizations that I led. We never had a procurement. We were that. But this is
Yeah.
where you can bring in a great partner to look at that entire SaaS software subscription model, right? Because there's a lot of opportunity to say, you probably got redundant tools in there. Who owns it? Where are the contracts? Are we getting the best pricing? There's organizations out there that you can leverage that give you guaranteed savings. Like they guarantee the savings that you're going to have, right? And that's gonna have an immediate bottom line impact on the second piece of it is one way that I love to work in the sales organization is on the contract management process, right? So when you think about from a SaaS perspective, you got marketing, bring in the lead, sales works it, sales close it, sales gets the contracts gets fulfilled, it gets implemented, gets billed, we collect cash, dollar retention rate, that whole cycle, right? But one of the things that I love to partner in the sales organization, and I actually work with some clients on this, is helping that client understand what is the ideal contract that you want your sales organization to sell. A lot of times in SaaS businesses, a lot of early stages, and even some Series B level companies that I've worked with, right? Their contracting's all over the place. It's like we got this one that has monthly terms and it's 60. And I get that you want to be able to sell and you're all about like we need to bring in volume of customers. But what that creates is inconsistency around your cash side. So one thing that I did and I recommend clients to do, and I've actually done some trainings around this, is like walk the sales organization through. Here's exactly that contract you want to sell. If you can get it semi-annual payment in advance, here's why the subscription date matters. Like bringing them along, helping the sales organization understand with them. A lot of times, like they're great at understanding what's in it for me, but when finance can partner inside the organization to help sales understand it, and then the biggest piece on top of that is like now you give them incentive to say, if you sell this kind of contract that's semi-annual in advance, that have this subscription breakout, this kind of piece of it, this kind of accuracy around it, then we'll give you an extra commissionable bonus on top of that, right? Now you got everybody bought in. And the thing about sales that I've learned, if you tell sales the right thing to go sell and you give them incentives around it, that's everything that they're going to try to sell. They're going to try to do that, right? And what that helps now, that brings in that better cash flow, right? Semi-annual in advance, getting that 6 months in advance, right? getting multi-years in this economic environment is kind of difficult, but that's way better impacting spacing that out monthly, right? Same thing that you can do on the AP side as well. But the whole purpose of like when I'm communicating around this is like you got to bring the business in that conversation, right? Don't dictate to the organization to say, "Hey, I need you to sell this kind of contract because this contract is the best." They're not going to do it. Too many times, finance, we go dictate to the business. We go tell the business, "Go do this, go do that." When we need to be in that conversation is like, how can we help support you deliver on this? So for me, I think those are some great like processes, some great quick wins that you can get to have an immediate impact on your cash flow.
Yeah, I love that. All of this is great. I think you're so right. Obviously, agree with all the sentiment around the tech layoffs and stuff like that. It's been rough, and we back in July, when the market downturn sort of conversation started, everyone was sort of jumping on this bandwagon of like, how to weather the storm. And like, so we did our own take on like weathering the storm, and there were all these VCs talking about the market outlook. And that was a big part of it. Our CEO talked about like cutting into the bone. Like that was how he described like that's your last sort of resort is like these layoff events. And I think the SaaS spending. I think it's a really good tip to bring in a partner. I haven't heard someone say that, so that's great. But the stuff about partnering with sales and the rest of the business, like that's a really great takeaway. I think for anyone listening is just a really practical story about where you can get better at this. So appreciate that. Like that's a great way to tackle that sort of first trend. I want to keep this going, and I only had 2 trends down, and I'd love to hear what yours are. But before we get there, the second trend I had, and it's a little bit newer. Weathering the storm was the end of 2022. It's like, how do we survive? And now I think everyone's kind of getting to this point where they're realizing like a startup, like a VC backed SaaS company can't really just like survive the year. Like you still need to grow through this. And so I would love to hear how you think finance can be like a growth catalyst for the business. Like it's not just saving money, but actively pushing the company to earn more, to grow more through, difficult times.
Yeah, for me, I think like the VC market and private equity market and strategic market has made a significant shift, right? Like the whole premise before of grow at all costs, like we don't care, like that is gone. Those
Right.
days are gone, right? And when you look at and I was looking at the interest statistic, and they were looking at a lot of SaaS businesses that had rule of 40s before the whole profitable growth. And you would always have these organizations that had triple digits revenue growth and that EBIT margin was negative, right? Like that was the profile of all of them, right? The version of going forward is if you're looking at a rule of 40 and you're able to have like that 20-30% revenue growth in like 10 to 20% EBIT margin, like that is the profitable growth way, right? Like you're spending on the top line, but you're doing it in a profitable way from the bottom line. Like that's that full perspective that you need to bring into it. So for me, I think like as SaaS companies are thinking about what we need to do, like how do we do that, right? Everything on the revenue upside, right? Like that we mentioned, some of the things that we talked about that you can go partner side, that is like a gold mine opportunity because a lot of finance organizations and even CFOs, right? Like they don't really have that collaboration that almost like I call it like the sparring partner mentality with the CRO or the VP of sales or the leader of the commercial organization, right? Where you can come in is like help them understand what are the pains and frustrations that they're seeing in their organization and how can you help serve them and help solve those pains. One of the biggest value adds of finance organizations of the future, how can you turn business pain into productivity, right? Like how can you make an organization more like produce more, right? Because that's going to have a bottom line impact. The second thing is like, and that's more on the top line, right? And then also like the insights that you can provide. It's way past the point of like, hey, our revenue growth is 30%, right? You need to be thinking about this balance between accuracy and precision inside the business, right? A
Mm.
lot of times, finance organizations, and we're in January, and probably in 2 more months, they're going to be reevaluating those budgets they did back in Q4 that are thrown out the window because the environment has changed, right? You need
Yep.
to have more agility insight. How are you as a finance leader in partnership with the business making these pivot or persevere conversations? And how are you making that informative and how are you making that proactive and not reactive, right? So for instance, if you're setting out your cash burn target and you're coming at the end of January and you're like, all right, do we pivot on that assumption that we had or do we continue to persevere? How are you informing
Mm.
the business around it? Right. I think that's another key way that finance can help, really drive this whole profitable growth mindset. And then obviously the major, like when we look at SaaS businesses that are going to have the highest valuations, those 10, 20 multiples going forward, they're going to have three characteristics. They're going to have a balanced revenue growth. They're going to have a nice EBIT margin, and they're going to be cash flow positive. They're going to have CFBs. CFBs is their cash flow break even and they're staying there, right? Like they've already crossed that chasm to where every dollar that they make in revenue, they're having a nice 10 to 20% margin on EBIT, and they're self-funded. Those are the businesses I guarantee. Remember I said this. Those are, when you look at the amount of dry powder that's in the VC private equity market, those SaaS businesses that have those three characteristics, they're going to have crazy valuations, crazy valuations. And to me, as you can start thinking about how you can work inside the business, as you can think about, as we talked about before, having some of those processes that are going to drive that, right? Like if you're able to partner in sales to drive a better contract management process that brings more cash inside the business, finance is already cash flow producing that, right? If you're able to, and then now that same contracting management process has a better customer experience on the top line from a revenue perspective, maybe that increases the dollar retention rate for the customer now because they had a great experience. So I think this is the golden time for finance to leave a legacy that we're no longer the cost people. We're not the cost function inside the organization. I intimately believe and know that we have a legacy that we could be revenue producing, we could be cash producing, and bottom line results driven inside the organization.
What a what a manifesto. I'm gonna plaster this everywhere. We're gonna be like Chris Ortega, Fresh FP&A take on finance's golden age. This is great. I think all of that is just great tips for sort of being that growth catalyst, being the driver of the business, being that true strategic partner. I think it ties into everything that you've said about what sort of your mindset is about kind of modernizing, making FP&A more fresh. So, and we're coming up on time. Two like bigger questions I want to ask, but before we get there, those are two trends that I've seen that I wanted to get your take on for sure. Are there any other 2023 trends that you would like to call out? Something you'd like to put your name on and be like, this is what people should be paying attention to this year? I'd love to turn the floor over to you and see what you've been or what's
Yeah,
been top of mind for you.
I think one of the biggest ones, man, is technology adoption, man. Like when you compare us to, and I hate the comparison aspect of it, but when you look at some parts of the business, right, they are technology adopters, right? Like they're the first ones to dive into that. We usually are like the laggers, like the last 10% to be like, nah, we should do that, right? There is so much power and scale. And platforms is, as we talked about, people, process, and partnership being that foundation for finance organization to build. The three scaling pillars: platform, performance, and profit optimization. That's how you scale. Platforms are a great way of doing it. And my trend that I want to see is you're going to start to see a lot more. We're already starting to see it with Chat GPT, right? The functionality that it has inside of like content creation and marketing, like the use case it has around that. I'm starting to see like it involved in the collection side and the AP side of it. You're starting to see a lot of machine learning. I remember working at a software at Marcis before, and we were actually implementing a solution called Collect AI, which was like an artificial intelligence that helped maintain the collections process. So you can start automate a lot of those manual, routine, low value, high transactional processes like AP, like AR, like T&E, right? You can start, and it's not and let me just make sure I caveat this to people, right? The goal of technology adoption is not meant to replace people. We're never going to be like to a point where it's just like Chris is replaceable. It's meant to put us at the right moment to deliver us the highest value with the highest skill set that we need, right? Do you want your high potential, high performing person taking this Excel document, downloading it from Salesforce, putting it into this model, updating and cleansing it? No, you don't want them doing it. Let technology do that. Put them in the right sides of it. So for me, I think a really, really big trend is the finance organization moving away from being technology laggers to being
Mhm.
technology adopters. That's how we scale.
Love that. Selfishly love that because, it's a Mosaic podcast and we want everybody to adopt all the technology, but like it for unselfish reasons as well, because I think it's a really good point. And it's exactly, you know, obviously we're trying to sell software and like that, but that's the promise. It's that you can get rid of some of those low value tasks so you can focus on being the strategic partner you want to be, because nobody wants to spend, sleep under their desk at like come quarter end or board meeting time just to, you know, get the numbers right. And like they have 5 minutes to put together some like insights and do an analysis. Like you want to focus all your time on like what's strategically valuable to the business. So I love that one. I want to get down to these last two questions. And I know I've been putting you to work, to be honest. Like I've been asking you some deeper questions. You've been awesome. I want to give it a little bit of a lighter ending, a little less practical. But I'm just curious, what's some of like the aha moments you've experienced as a fractional CFO? Like, what are some wins that you've seen with clients by implementing your framework for Fresh FP&A?
I think some of the wins, man, and some of the best moments and why I love what we do at Fresh FP&A is the impact that it has. I think when I look back over my career, Joe, one of the things I love the most is I love being part of the journey, right? Like I love being part of that book where you're writing the chapters, right? You're in chapter 1 or maybe you fast forward to chapter 8. That's one thing that I've absolutely loved with organizations is like seeing them go through that journey in that chapter and get the impact, right? Another aha moment is like when I sit with CEOs and board of directors and founders, and maybe they, VC or private equity backed, and I'm sitting with those VC and private equity people. And the first thing that they say is like, man, we've never worked with finance or people like you. Like, who are you guys? Like, where did you come from? Like, what do you do? That's such an aha moment because like they have all this experience, right? And they never worked with what it meant to be working with a strategic advisor, right? And there's some clients that we brought on, Joe, where the first thing that they say is like, man, it's so refreshing to have a strategically focused finance person, not just a person that's masquerading as a fractional CFO and they're really a controller. And I'm not knocking people that do that, right? But you got a lot of fractional CFOs out here, man, that are just controllers. They're just accountants, man. They're just
Yeah.
accountants, and accountants don't make great finance business partners. So that's another aha moment. I think the third one, aha moment as well too, and this is from a putting my leadership hat on, is seeing other people that come join Fresh FP&A and like they're able to, they have their full time big boy, big girl job, but they're actually able to work on these passion projects that we have for our clients, right? And to see them light up. I mean, this was my story, Joe, if I'm being honest and
Yeah.
transparent, right? Like I was doing kind of Fresh FP&A passively while having a full-time job leading a finance organization at a high growth SaaS business. I was doing them both at the same time. And to be able to provide that opportunity for other professionals to work on, to develop new skills, to work on passion projects, to do things that they never thought they can do or skills they never thought they can develop, and they can provide that impact and help clients at the end of that, man, that's been like one of the most rewarding things to sit across and say, man, Chris, I love, and the thing about it is like, I love working in like my macro teams that I have, right? Like we, have a project and we bring in a person that has this expertise and the client's happy and they're happy and seeing that whole recipe of success that you're able to give not only the client, but the professional as they leverage their skill and, maybe get to a point where they're like, Chris, man, since I worked with Fresh FP&A in a consulting capacity, like this is something I've learned. I want to be able to go full time to be able to do this, right? Like I want to be full time dedicated to doing these things. I think a lot of those moments have been like really those moments where it's like, Chris, keep pushing, keep going forward. You're making an impact because at the end of the day, Joe, like for everybody listening, my the reason why I started Fresh FP&A was not to be, grow this thing to be a multi-billion dollar, $1 million consultancy and all over the world. I want to make an impact. I want to write the story. I want to use my skills, passions, talents, and experiences to help others realize and achieve greatness. And as long as I'm doing, man, that's some of the most beautiful things. And when you see that in action and you see that being implemented and you see you see clients that are changing their entire game of what they thought about working with a finance organization. Those are those beautiful aha moments, man.
That's awesome. It sounds really rewarding. I'm sure it's not like your job got, it's difficult in a different way. It's not like, oh, my job was so hard before and now it's easy, but like, it just sounds really rewarding. I'm sure you're working hard every day, and it just sounds, you just sound really happy, man. I'm happy for you. It sounds really great. So I love to hear it. I have one last question for you. We can keep it short. We can keep it high level, but I ask everybody that comes on, and I'm excited to hear what you think about it. It's, just what's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you started out in your accounting career?
One thing I know now that I wish I would have known, I would like earlier in my career, I think I would have. One thing I know now is I wake up every day and I look for failure, because outside of failure have been some of the greatest learning opportunities and expansion of my comfort zone. So I think if I was younger, I would have like been less, I would have been more encouraging of seeking failure and not trying to fail, right? Which is a whole different mindset. Like now, man, I wake up every day and I was doing a podcast with a university student. They asked me that. I'm like, man, I seek failure every day. And the
Yeah.
reason why I do that is because outside of failure is learning. That's it. The- There's two options. You either win or you learn. You only lose if you don't learn. So I think for me and for all the listeners out there, the moment that you demystify failure and turn it into learning, the whole game changes, man.
Yeah. That's such a positive outlook. Yeah. Honestly, you're just a really positive guy. I appreciate you being here. It's Monday morning as we record this. It's great to start with your perspective on everything, because it's really big optimist. I love to hear it. It's getting me kind of amped up to start the week. So I appreciate that. I've kept you long enough. So I just want to say I appreciate you being here. I really enjoyed the chat, but I want to turn the floor over to you. Where can people go to learn more about you, learn more about Fresh FP&A, follow along with all of the fantastic content that you put out? So I want to make that disclaimer. I'll link out to everything, but floor is yours. Where would you
Yeah,
like
so if
people to
you want to
follow?
learn more about Fresh FP&A and how we can help transform and scale your finance organization, check us out at www.freshpa.com. If you want to learn more, we're always posting content, so much stuff. Follow us at Fresh PA. And then also you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on there as well too. Feel free to ask me any questions, connect with me, challenge me on some of these points, some elements that I missed, but that's where you can find more about me and more about Fresh FP&A.
Awesome. Well, Chris, it was a great time. I just want to say thanks for being on the roll forward, and yeah, hope we can do it again sometime. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Roll Forward. This show is powered by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Roll Forward wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit mosaic.tech/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.